You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. I'm your host, Kelly Reynolds, and today we are looking at the sweeter side of romance. I'm talking a 100% closed-door, no-steam book. Now, let this be a reminder that just as with relationships in real life, romance novels do not need to include sex to be considered romance. But first things first, let's talk business. I do just want to share a few quick exciting updates to the show, starting with our very first episode of Tit Talk, our new monthly panel discussion on YouTube. Stay tuned for more on that. And while you're doing that, also look out for information on our very first summer special, Slick Summer Nights, which hits the podcast this July. More on that, on both of those to come, and the best way to keep up with all of the updates would be to follow us on our socials and website. You can always catch up on past episodes of Boobies and Newbies on your favorite podcast app or on boobiesandnewbies.com. If you're a fan of the show and you've got a few minutes to spare, I'd greatly appreciate a positive review on Apple Podcasts. And last but not least, if you would like to show the podcast a little extra love and support and join an awesome community of people, might I recommend you head on over to our Patreon page. We've got monthly patron-only events, early sneak peeks, bonus clips, so much more, and you gain instant access to it for as little as $1 per month. You will, of course, find links to all of the above in today's show notes. And now, please join me in welcoming today's guest, co-host of Hello Out There, an improvised road trip through the apocalypse. It's Lyndi Macke.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome.
Thanks for having me. I am very excited to talk about this book today.
I'm excited that you're excited to talk about this, but no, I'm excited too.
That squeaky clean, steam-free, mom-approved romance.
Yeah. Somebody recently introduced me to the terms no steam and low steam, which I think are great ways, great alternatives, I'll say, to this label that I do not prefer with romance, which is clean romance. I don't like that terminology because it implies that there's something dirty about the other romance.
It just sounds like everyone's using like Pushing Daisy's level protection, like just full hazmat suits as they interact.
Yeah, we got to spray it down, hose you off first.
You can't touch or someone will die. It's
lots of sanitizing.
Yeah. Romance in the COVID era, for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I am not. Nope, it's not for me. And you know what? Some people have tried. There have been some people who have written COVID, I don't want to say COVID romances, but romance that takes place during.
Oh, I don't think To Paradise counts as a romance.
No, but there have been some. And it's kind of been a hot topic amongst readers is like, is this something that we want to see discussed? Like, is this something that does there have to be a certain amount of time that passes before we feel comfortable discussing it? But honestly, I don't see anything sexy about right now personally. So I could do without it.
I think, it was something I wondered too at the beginning of all this of, will this be like, a love in the time of cholera kind of era for literature? And I think like 99% of what we've felt about this pandemic has been annoyance and irritation, and the other 1% has been absolute devastation. So I can't really see
it's hard
this
to
being
like,
a fun topic in our lifetime at least. And maybe, I don't know. I mean, Twilight used the Spanish flu as a story caveat, right? That's how we got Edward. So
Twilight also had one of the supporting characters that was a general in the Confederate Army. So it's not.
I forgot about that, and I just fully choked on my coffee. Oh my word, Jasper Cullen was totally I forgot.
I was only reminded of it recently because, like, we were talking about before we started recording Reddit versus TikTok, and
Right.
I was recently reminded, I think a lot of people are doing rewatches of Twilight. It must have just hit some streaming platform or something.
I think it did. I think it's on Netflix or Hulu right now.
But that was one of the things people pointed out was, are we not going to talk about this nice slave owner that's made it onto Twilight?
Well, there's also been a big resurgence on, and I don't know if this is just, my own deep dives or whatever, but I recently saw a Reddit thread by an member of the LDS Church. I think it was about the whole thing came to light because of Under the Banner of Heaven coming out as a series, and someone was like, what, fellow ex-Mormons, what are some things that you notice now in literature that you maybe didn't think twice about? And someone goes, oh, Carlisle Cullen is a Joseph Smith allegory. And I was like, oh, because I've never been a member of the LDS Church. I didn't know that. And they basically pointed out all these similarities of, he gets run out of one place. He gets this family. He builds this large family that will be together forever. Each of his sons is partnered off with like a suitable mate.
Oh, my God.
He leads them into this promised land. They abstain from things that other vampires indulge in. It was this endless list. And I was like, oh my word, that is absolutely.
This makes perfect sense. And honestly, I do think I have seen something akin to this circle TikTok as well, because the more things you listed off, I was like, oh my God, that's right. Yes. Oh, that too. Oh, yeah. God. And they're partnering off with and calling each other, they're like sisters and brothers.
Right. Yeah. And the covens are prominent families, which is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
wild.
Not to comment at all on Mormon culture or anything like that. I'm not even speaking to that, but it did catch me as like, oh my word, that is absolutely a thinly veiled homage to the prophet Joseph Smith.
Well, and if anybody's wondering how in the hell that relates back to the conversation we're having,
sorry.
I mean, no, it really does, because Twilight and follow-up to Twilight being what was originally Twilight fan fiction that became 50 Shades of Grey, are both considered like huge gateways into romance for a lot of people, myself included. Twilight was one of the first series I remember sitting down and like wanting to read. And so
it was, I think, for all the mockery of Twilight, like it is one of the first series that I remember just being unable to put down.
Yeah.
And as like a 14, 15-year-old, just really diving in.
It just goes to show that sometimes it's worth looking back at the things that you've read, watched, listened to, maybe in years past, that maybe have a different meaning today, knowing what you now know and understand about the world.
So sorry for taking so far off track, but I appreciate your almost kindergarten teacher like rerouting.
I am here for it. This show is nothing if not full of tangents that are usually focused on food. So the fact that we chose a different one that,
I managed to
happened in the first 5 minutes.
Adjacent to the topic, at least.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about this podcast of yours? Because I am a comedy fan. I am an improviser myself. So I love, I've never listened to, aside from your own, an improvised podcast.
I mean, thank you, because there are much better improvised podcasts out there. I appreciate that we're your one and only.
You're my gateway.
Yeah, no, just stay there. Just stay there believing we're great. So Hello Out There is, as you said, it's an improvised road trip through the apocalypse. I play Andy, who is a teenage daughter of scientists who was raised in a bunker during a nuclear fallout, not fallout, legally distinct, not fallout, a nuclear apocalypse. And basically her parents raised her in complete isolation. And there's been some, implication. They brought her into the bunker well before the bombs dropped, which is kind of a little mystery. But they raised plants, sentient plants, and had all these experiments. And when Andy turns 18, she basically yearns for the world, to learn anything about the world. and she grabs a plant, sentient plant, and she steals her parents' solar-powered van, and she takes off across the country to meet people and learn and grow and change and have her little nuclear rumspringa. And along the way, we interview everyone from, a band of Mad Max-esque road warriors to a man whose wife is a pile of tin cans to the former city of Las Vegas, which is now occupied entirely by irradiated lesbians.
I love that.
The whole story of how the town of Free Donuts, the lesbian oasis, came to be is entirely credited to the women of the Ultimate Tier List podcast. That was not our idea, but they ran with it.
Well, and honestly, I have to say, every example you've used so far of the characters that we meet in this podcast, I believe every single one of these things to be very potentially true for our future. Like, I could see it all. I could see all of them.
Yeah, it's wholly improvised. My co-host Taylor Davis is a Chicago improv guy, now out of Springfield, Illinois, and he's incredibly talented. He plays a phenomenal plant, and we're currently on hiatus, unfortunately, but we hope to be back in the near future. So in the meantime, go back. We have quite the archive, and we really hope you enjoy it.
I don't know if I feel like most of my friends who listen to podcasts listen to either shows like mine that are like 100% unscripted, but there's still like some kind of format to it, or they listen to ones that are like scripted narrative stories. And I think this is a great option that's like in between. Where can everybody find and follow you and keep up to date on what's coming up next for you?
So right now, the best way to keep track of everything, because I have another podcast in the works right now that I haven't debuted yet. The best way to find me is at Lyndi Macke, just on Twitter, at Lyndi Graham on Instagram. It's not a deep well of a resource, but I am pretty vocal when I make something neat. And in the meantime, you get to just hear about bands I like. So win-win for you.
And of course, you can find Hello Out There and listen to past episodes of that.
Yes, at Pod Out There on social. And we're on all the podcatchers under Hello Out There. So our logo is a little van. So
very
easily found.
Yes. Well, we've got today's book to talk about, and
let's do it.
That book is Love Unexpected by Jenny Proctor. And this contemporary friends to lovers, but also co-workers romance with a hint.
Possibly stalker and victim.
Yeah, I was going to say a hint of, I said it in a nicer way. I was like, secret identity a la Cyrano de Bergerac.
There is some of that. Yeah. Yeah. Which is definitely a softer approach to it.
Yes, for sure.
The people of Goodreads were scathing. Let's
frame it how you want to frame it. Was published in October 2021. It's available on Amazon for free if you have Kindle Unlimited. It's also the second book in Jenny Proctor's Some Kind of Love series. I believe all four books begin with love, something, someone. All four books are available now for free with Kindle Unlimited. This was my first Jenny Proctor read. I had kind of bookmarked a few of her books on Instagram in the past because they have really cute illustrated covers. They're very bright and vibrant. I actually really love her presence as an author on Instagram. I think that's where I follow her. So this, I wanted to dive into one eventually, and you had specifically requested reading something that was maybe on the sweeter, lower steam side, and this seemed like the perfect opportunity for us to do that.
Yes. Yeah. Just with the knowledge that my mother would likely listen to this, I feel pretty okay about what we read because that was steam-free. It was a book with a dehumidifier in the middle of the room.
This one's for you, Mom. Well, let me
shouting out Lynette Malley on the pod.
What's up, Lynette? Let me give everyone the definitely not so brief synopsis for
it's a
Love
long
Unexpected.
Synopsis. Yeah.
As somebody who I read books cover to cover, and every episode of this podcast, I try to say, here is a brief synopsis of the book. And I am finding more and more that these synopses are not brief. And, it's like, I think there really is an art to writing a synopsis, and I am not going to pretend that I have that skill. However, I do think that there are so many people who choose a book based off of the synopsis. So I would advise writers out there to maybe think about that synopsis a few more times, run it past a few more eyes before putting it out on the internet for everybody.
There's a difference between a synopsis and a treatment. Mm-hmm. And, in the sense of, I know you come from screenwriting as well, like a treatment is blow by blow, what's going to happen in 1 page or less for a whole film or a whole episode or a whole book. This feels pretty close in that looking at it's, big font, but it's large.
It covers a lot of ground as well. And I will say, had I read this synopsis, I probably did read this synopsis before deciding on this particular book. And in retrospect, I don't know why I chose the second book and not the first book in the series. I really can't remember what it was.
I don't think it lacks anything. I will say, seeing that it was the second in the series and then reading a few reviews that were like, oh, and it's the second in the series and here's what it ties back to the first. I don't feel like you lose anything starting with 2. It just weaves 2 characters from the first into the story, which you wouldn't even realize.
And that's a good way to bring up too. I know I said I was going to read the synopsis, but pause on that. But this brings up a good discussion topic in that I'm not sure what your romance reading experience has been, Lyndi, because generally a lot of series, when we label romance as series, they're usually interconnected in that there are characters that each book shares. Right. It's like a multiverse. However, each book is usually able to be read on its own.
Yeah. So it's interesting because when I first reached out about this podcast, and we were first talking about it, I was working my way through the Enchanted Ink series, and that is one that you absolutely cannot skip ahead on.
Sure.
Because each book is kind of a fragment of the story. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of the school of romance that I come from is classic chick lit. As a teenager who was way too young, I read C. Jane Wright by Sarah Milanowski and Farron Jacobs, which is a writer's guide to writing and publishing chick lit.
Ooh.
And Sarah Milanowski was really my entree into it. She wrote the Bras and Broomsticks series.
Okay.
And I loved those as literally probably a 12-year-old. Mm-hmm. They're teen lit. And she previously had a career in writing more grown-up chick lit. Mm-hmm. And still runs, I believe, in that circle with those writers of
women's fiction.
The Sophie Kinzellas.
Yes.
Well, yeah, and it's not called chick lit anymore, I don't think. In 2006 it was.
Well, and what is women's fiction but
exactly.
Like a fancier name for what we already used to call chick lit? I personally don't really like either one.
I know. But no, and it was during an era, it was the Sex and the City era of Candace Bushnell, Sophie Kinsella,
Meg Cabot
for sure. Mm-hmm. And so I remember being a junior higher and high schooler and just devouring all those novels despite not knowing anything about life or men or anything.
Sure.
It's these women who all live in the city and wear incredible clothes and have great jobs like news producer or magazine editor or
so
whatever.
Many magazines.
And they're all one level below where they want to be in life. They're dating, and the guy's so dreamy, but there's a problem and we're not married, and or they're playing the fields and that's the premise, or whatever. And so there's a lot of different tellings, almost all white women, by the way, and I don't want to overlook 100%. That. It's very, very white cishet romance. I kind of went from that into more read it and weep, This Is Us kind of novels.
That's a switch.
the work of Sarah Dessen. I read The Truth About Forever until the cover fell off, and my mother asked if I was okay. I wasn't, just spoiler. I was going through some stuff. So that was kind of, where I started of these ideas of, escape kind of emotional escape kind of novels and very sweet romances. And in Sarah Dessen's book, someone always dies of cancer, which sucks, but
and I mean, it's similar with, people have mentioned John Green, people have mentioned Nicholas Sparks on more than one occasion.
Jodi Picoult as well.
Yes.
I don't think in Sarah Dessen's it's ever the protagonist that dies.
So have you progressed out of this sad, moody,
the saddest books
love
of all time?
Books?
Yeah, I take Zoloft now, and I'm doing great. I was very much the kid who was like, I'm not reading the assigned novel. I'm slipping the assigned novel over the novel I want to be reading, or I'm reading under the table in
Good for you.
class. I was very much that girl. Over time, particularly in college, I went to college for writing for television. So I kind of, really embraced more of my comedy passion. Yeah. And haven't really gotten into romance apart from rom-coms, maybe,
sure.
Like I'm a huge fan of New Girl, shows like that. So that romance novel love kind of transitioned into more a medium that I was focused on.
Which makes sense. I mean, that makes perfect sense. There are also plenty of angsty romance reads that you can read. I mean, there are people who do want romance that is going to make them cry and make them scream, and there are options for you. It's just, this might not be the podcast that gives you those recommendations. So well, and again, this has all been to say that I don't know why I chose the second book in this series over others, but like you said, you don't necessarily miss out on anything by starting with the second book in this series, which I have found to be the case in most romance series. There have been ones in the past that I've read where I have wondered, like, who is this person that they keep talking about? Or this person must have their own book that I just don't know about. And so this one, you do get a sizable cast of characters to engage with.
A lot of people.
Yeah, most of whom I'm assuming are going to be present sort of throughout the series and maybe even beyond. Maybe some of them come from some of Jenny Proctor's previous books. I have no idea. But let me go ahead and give the synopsis. Again, the not so brief synopsis. A famous boss, a secret identity, and a hilarious road trip to love. Yes, Rosie does have a crush on Isaac, her YouTube famous boss. Does she ever talk to him? Absolutely not. Crippling social anxiety can do that. But Rosie is nothing if not tenacious. Ignoring her friend's advice to just talk to him already, nope, that's way too hard. She instead opts to pursue a virtual relationship with Isaac using a secret identity. The plan is genius.
It's not. It's not genius. That one.
No. Online, Rosie has social skills she'd never dream of having in person. She's possibly even cool. If Isaac can just get to know her, he'll see how amazing she is. But then a spontaneous road trip throws Rosie and Isaac together, and their virtual and in-person lives collide. 1,100 miles in a 70s-era VW hatchback. What could possibly go wrong?
I just want to note, and this is not a knock on Jenny Proctor, but that's not how you spell 70s.
Oh, yeah, no, you're right. It is, again, something worth noting. Double check, triple check those synopses. Much to Rosie's surprise, she doesn't constantly humiliate herself. Conversation is easy, and their chemistry, it's pretty much off the charts. But every road trip is bound to hit a speed bump or two. Car pun. Will Rosie's secret identity be the thing that brings them together or the thing that tears them apart? Okay.
Please explain how that could be the thing that brings them together.
No.
Will her big lie be the thing that makes him love her?
This is going to be what I say about this book is like a blanket statement. I do think I will say there are things that I do like about this book.
Same.
And we'll get into that. That being said, this is not the book for me. I can say that, and I knew it very early on, mostly just because of the setup, mostly just because of how their relationship, this relationship they begin online that is like so false, such a lie, that I knew I was automatically going to strongly dislike what followed. And so I will say, I do think there are a lot of things that I like about this book, and I think that this book is for somebody, but it's not me.
I would almost say this book felt like it belonged in a different era of my life personally.
Yes.
Like, I was describing the books, the kind of stuff I read voraciously in my teens. This book would have been totally in that zone. 100%. And honestly, because I understood the difference between reality and fantasy, I don't think there would have been any real negative ramifications of reading that at a young age. Because, the whole thing is built on this woman catfishing her boss.
Right.
The guy is handsome and charming by my 16-year-old self standards.
I 100% understand.
I would not have had a crush on this guy as an adult.
No, but that to me is the biggest problem. This to me would have made for a better young adult romance in maybe 2009. Like, I think there are a lot of things, and this is something I've noticed and I have critiqued on other episodes of the podcast, is that sometimes there's a story or a specific trope or a specific way that characters act where it feels like something we maybe got away with 10 years ago that we now recognize as problematic, or just something wrong with it in a 2022 context. And this book came out within the past year. So it's something that I think might have been okay, and honestly it might have been even more well received, and I could see like the film adaptation of it, I mean, I could see that if it had been a different time, an earlier time, and maybe the people who are enjoying this book are of a younger age. That I wouldn't surprise me, but
it felt like maybe it was written in like 2006 and shelved for like 15 years.
Which I don't think it was, considering that she's an indie author. These are books that she's publishing herself.
Yeah,
so
it just, for our audience, because who knows if they'll read it, but the premise is that Rosie, who, it was so funny because my husband saw the cover and he was like, "Oh, that's a picture of you." Because this girl's wearing a blazer and like my style of glasses, and she has some short curly dark hair, and I thought that was very cute, and I did adore this character, but her behavior was baffling, because she basically works for a professional YouTuber who, and also his channel is called Random Eye, which, using random as a descriptor is that stopped in 2012.
This, honestly, the whole concept of his YouTube channel was also baffling to me. Like, the fact that he has 70 employees working for him, I was thrown. I was like, I don't understand. It feels like someone who
heard about David Dobrik and did no further research.
Yeah, like, and it's like, it's okay. No, I'll get to it in a second. You continue on the thought that you had.
He's not pranking anybody. He's not doing anything compelling. He's not even eating weird food in his weird YouTube house. No. He's just a guy that lives in the South and makes normal videos about himself and is charming and handsome. And even his lesbian friends are in love with him. And in that sense, and I hate to say this, he's a Marty Stew.
I don't know who that is.
Mary Sue, the concept of a woman being so one-dimensional that she does everything good all the time. She does everything the way you would want.
Got it.
She's a cardboard cutout of a woman.
Okay.
He is the male version of that, which I've heard called a Marty Stew.
That's funny. I don't know. I've heard the Mary Sue. I don't know if I've heard Marty Stew. That's how interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of, okay, let me tell you about some of the things that I do like about this book. First of all, I love that there is diverse representation. I love this cast of characters that work, because 90% of the people, well, let's be honest, it's like 99% of the people who are in this book, they all work for him. They are all people somehow associated with him and his channel. It's very much in that in that way, a workplace romance. You have like his sisters involved, his brother-in-law, who are, you know, aren't even necessarily, I think his sister-in-law, or his sister is like a designer. Like she doesn't even necessarily work for his brand, but it's like she's still, you know, part of the team. And he has this wonderful lesbian couple that, you know, have kids that work with him. I'm like, this is
I'm so
great.
sad that they were not apparently book one. It was a different couple.
So I did look to see if they were also book one. And I think it's his sister and his brother-in-law that are the first book. And so it makes me wonder if maybe there is another series where that couple does get their love story. I don't know. At the same time, I do appreciate there just being like some inclusion of queer characters. That's more than a lot of people are willing to put into their books.
Healthy queer parents.
Yes.
Like parents who are, they're a team. Their kids are super sweet and cute and well-adjusted and freaking adorable. Like I loved the kid in this book.
Not annoying at all.
Not remotely. He was a doll, and I mean, he was my personal hero of the story.
I love that. Well, and it's very much a found family. Everybody is very close to each other. And you know, I like that. I do like that. I like this concept that I feel like could have been explored better, but it had specific moments that worked. And it's this idea of you are not your public persona. And Isaac is this acclaimed YouTuber of this channel that would never exist in real life. And he is so focused on presenting himself as that version of Isaac all the time to everyone, which means in his mind, he needs to have this girlfriend that's also a public figure and understands what it means to be in the spotlight, blah, 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 blah. And that is both very frustrating to read, but also in some small way relatable. Like I do understand, especially like because I talk to so many authors and content creators that they're very thoughtful about what they put on the internet because that does affect their brand. It does affect what people want, if people want to buy their books, if people want to listen to their podcasts, et cetera, et cetera. And so I feel like that could have been explored in a better way, but at the root, I did like that was something being touched on, at least in some way.
Yeah, and I think, you know, I was recently talking to somebody who was going through a divorce in their early 30s, which is pretty young to go through a divorce and a really crappy situation. And he just made the comment, and again, this was like completely like just an absolute authentic conversation I had with a real person where he was like, I valued the things I thought I needed to value in a person rather than real connection. And so he's like, I married the prettiest girl I knew. I married, you know, this girl who I thought was going to do all these things for me because I believed this idea that if you found somebody who had these superficial qualities, everything would just come together. And he's like, the reality is like we both were fundamentally unable to fulfill each other's needs because we didn't have the emotional basis to build that relationship. And you know, there's so much of that in the story of, you know, Isaac has this girlfriend. She's also, I believe, a YouTuber, at least an influencer. And she's described as, you know, beautiful and charismatic, but she's also kind of, you know, there's some of that Taylor Swift "You Belong With Me" vibe of she wears short skirts, I wear t-shirts. But she very much is the cheer captain type. You know, she's wearing the bikini to the pool party and doesn't want to get wet.
Yes.
She's, you know, won't be broken up with in public because that is horrible.
She's all about the image.
She's all about what she projects. And I think for the time in his life that Isaac gets together with her, he really feels like if I can get that superficial connection, if I can get those things sorted about our image, about how we look together, how we create together, if we can be on each other's channels and audience share, the rest will fall into place.
We can make the rest work. Yeah.
Yeah. Because, and it's not that he doesn't want to love her. He does. But the connection, that you need to have a deep love and a deep relationship isn't present, and he assumes it'll come and it never does. And so you see him at the start of the book kind of like, ugh. And that's how Rosie, or her alter ego Anna, gets kind of her opening of like, I love this band so much, and it's like, me too, that's like a core part of my personality for some reason. So that's her entree into it.
The other thing that I will say I liked, and honestly, I try to keep this as much of a positive space as I can, but I will say this is probably the last thing that I did like about the book, is that I did like that Rosie, I liked the way that Rosie's crippling anxiety, her social anxiety, was explored. Like, I feel like it could have been done maybe in a different way, but I accepted that as her excuse for why she wasn't going to pursue talking to, her boss in person.
I live with serious anxiety and social anxiety that is, it complicated my dating life quite a bit when I was out on the market, because it is easier when you're, not necessarily shy, but just unable to function. Around the person that you like. That makes it very tough to bridge the gap between, I really like this person, I think there could be something there, and I have a big old crush, and actually saying 2 words to them.
Right.
And that was, to me, that was very felt. And it was also written, I think, from the perspective of someone who's been there.
It was very respectful.
I didn't feel like Jenny Proctor, I felt like she knew intimately of which she spoke with this one.
There was never any, like, of course her friends were like saying, oh, just talk to him, like, he will love you for you. But there was also like, yes, they were encouraging her to talk to him knowing that she has this social anxiety, but at the same I didn't feel like anybody necessarily like crossed a line being like, oh, just get over it. Like, this is something that you can just move beyond. Like, there were mentions of her having maybe like some issues in the past, and like, well, okay, maybe this is something that you were told by your doctor to work on. Great, let's practice doing this. And so I did like that clearly she had close enough relationships with some of her coworkers that they knew these things about her, and they knew like some of the practices and the self-soothing that she should be doing to feel better in anxious situations. So I was like, okay, this shows me that like they have a close enough relationship for them to know this about her. So I felt like mostly it was done in a respectful way.
Well, these characters both, I think one thing that was great but also fundamentally unrealistic was they both have this powerful support system of friends that know them well, totally get them, yada yada, but it's the same people. And that's where I was like, I have never been able to operate in a friend group where everyone was this close, but I didn't get to know one person at all because I couldn't even talk. It's
the only thing that makes it make more sense to me is that there's technically a power imbalance. Like, and I know
there is, and it is very inappropriate what happens.
He's her boss, like, and he is not only her boss, but the boss of like all these other people. And he does emphasize, and people emphasize this about his character, that he doesn't like being treated as like a boss figure or a CEO figure. Like, he doesn't want people to feel like they can't approach him. But
that's so problematic in a real life workplace setting.
Yeah, like you're still signing the checks. Like, it doesn't matter. So now we begin. I'm glad you brought up the whole group of friends, because this brings up issue number 1 for me. I don't mind the like secret identity aspect. I don't necessarily mind hiding behind the keyboard, because I've definitely read other romances, epistolary romances, where they're falling in love via texting or letters. Or
Hana Khan Carries On by Uzma Jalaluddin was an incredible You've Got Mail-esque.
You've Got Mail has been having like a moment the last couple of years.
Hana Khan, I mean, that was one of my favorite books of the year. Like,
so it's not that. It's what bothered me is that it's a lie for everyone. Literally everybody knows that she is this person pretending to be somebody else, and they're encouraging her and they're telling her, oh, I faked this NDA so like you guys can keep chatting. And so everybody is in on the lie except for Isaac. And that to me was the problem in the setup. That bothered me tremendously. And then couple that with the fact that it's not just somebody having a crush on their boss and not having, you know, the courage or the, you know, ability to be able to approach them in real life. It's also that she's had a crush on him and like lusted
That's why
after
she works
him
for him
for years.
Yeah.
That to me was icky.
There's a scene where she describes her bedroom at her parents' house and says that she was like basically his first like Patreon patron, essentially. Like she got the first ever batch of merch that he designed.
She
and
bought
picked
all
out
the hats in every color.
On her 4-poster bed, she has 4 beanies from this guy's brand from like 10 years ago. And this man is expected to walk into her bedroom and see that and just be like, oh, dope, my greatest supporter.
Yeah, that's
not my stalker.
That's what was weird to me. And look, I've read books before where I'm trying to remember if it's one of Kylie Scott's book. She has a great rock star series, and I want to say it's from her series where one of the characters has been a fan of this band like for years, and she has a poster up of them in like her childhood bedroom that she doesn't currently live in, but she's not working with, and somehow she gets involved.
She didn't move cross country to go work for the band.
No, it's very much like she, you know, I think it's that her friend, I think it's the second book in Kylie Scott's series, because in the first book, her friend accidentally marries one of the band members in Vegas. And so
oopsie poopsie.
The band is, I know, oops, as you do. And so the band is kind of brought into her sphere, and she's embarrassed about the fact that like her sister tells this guy, oh yeah, she's had your poster up on her wall for years. Like, and I
that's
think
the thing,
that's the natural.
I don't know if you've experienced this with, you know, your dip into talking to public figures, but my husband loves like Comic-Con, PAX, like these opportunities to meet creators, and he loves being able to go up to creators and be like, hey, like, nice to meet you. I loved this thing you made. Thank you so much for making it. I'm such a fan. And he like has this composure where he's like super normal. He's like, hey, Steve Bloom, you're one of my childhood heroes. Selfie? And Steve Bloom's like, heck yeah, let's take a selfie. And I was like, that's Steve Bloom of Star Wars. And he's like, yeah, it's fine. I personally, when my husband, same guy, when he proposed to me, he did it at a concert for one of my favorite bands and got the band in on it. And I was so embarrassed I almost puked. Because I was like, I don't want to meet these people. These are not our friends. These are public figures. And he was like, there's 200 people at the show. They are not public figures. This is a band you love. Go hug the singer. He just helped you get engaged. Like, be normal. And I'm like, but I listened to his stuff in college. I don't know how, you know, it's like, I can't with public figures. Like, I met Janet Varney at a con and burst into tears. Yeah. The idea of going to work for someone that you've been stalking on this level and then making him fall in love with you made me want to vomit. I was like, I can't.
It's a lot.
I don't want to meet famous people ever if I can help it.
Well, and I will say I do work as an author's assistant for a couple of authors, all of whom I've read and really enjoyed their books. And we have, you know, that relationship where I can say like, oh, I really love your books, but also like I work for them, you know? And
if there's a professional relationship, it's a lot less intimidating. I think I find like, guess on my podcast, whatever, I'm not starstruck by that because I'm like, hey, we're here to do a job together. Great collaborating with you. But if like you're in a setting like a PodCon or a YouTube con, I don't want someone to know that I own their merch. You know, it feels odd and gross. And to me, it wasn't professional of her to go work for this guy as his biggest fan.
It's also like, why is she in love with him to begin with? Like, because I mean, she makes it clear on like the first or second page that she says, I'm in love with this man. Like everybody,
parasocial AF.
They all know that she's in love with him. And this is, I get the idea. This is why I think this would have worked better as a young adult story or like a new adult story, is this idea of, you know, you have this idealized version of who this star is, and then you get the opportunity to work for them. If you're like 17, 18, 19 years old, I'm sure you would jump at the chance. Like,
but it's a parasocial relationship. It's not a relationship that a fully grown adult whose healthy brain has matured to completion or whatever.
And everybody is in on it. Everybody is encouraging it.
This isn't how healthy adults behave. And that was something that irked me a little bit of this is being portrayed as it's healthy, it's just quirky.
This is why I say there were so many points in the book that I feel like had that not been the setup, I might have enjoyed it more, because I love a good road trip. Road trip in like a romance novel is one of my favorite things to read. And honestly, I think the road trip is one of the better parts of the book, and I wish it had come in sooner, because that's when they actually start discussing things together as themselves.
Just organically falling in love on a road trip would have been such a sweeter premise, because like they're going around, they're eating at Waffle House, they're trying hot chicken, they're meeting people at a park.
And she takes him to her sister's house, and he gets to meet some of her family. Like that was the part where I was like, this is great. This is, and honestly from the synopsis, I kind of expected the whole book to be the road trip. Like I thought it was going to be a lot more about them going on the road, and it's like, oh no, I have to keep up this double life of like, he knows me as this persona, but also as like my real life person. And by the time they were on the road trip, it was really just about the two of them. Yeah. Anyway, like he's
but also
going
the road trip is to meet the persona.
Her online
persona. That's a bad reason to travel.
Yeah.
Like if the motivation wasn't great, and then like they also are in a 1970s VW Bug. And as a person who grew up in a household that had a 1970s VW Bug, I'm gonna tell you a couple things about him, because I learned to drive in a 1970s VW Bug, or I think it might have been 68 or 78. It was a Super Beetle, and it was my dad's baby for a couple of years. They're not air cooled, so they run hot and flood very easily. And taking one on a road trip is about the worst thing I can think of, because I swear to you, even on a fully refurbished, well-maintained VW Bug, the air conditioning, not going to work the whole time. The brakes may not work the whole time. If you turn the key for just a bit too long, you're toast on the side of the road for a long time. Like,
well, and then add in the fact that you have this third person with you that's the cameraman that they talk about is like over 6 feet tall, and he's in the back seat.
Yeah, it's essentially they're child abusing the cameraman, which is
poor
dark.
Guy.
Because I remember my brother being about 10 when we had that car, and him refusing to even get in the backseat. It was like you were knees up to your chin.
Yeah.
I mean, the trunk's in the front. Like, there's not a single thing about it that is road trip, like, seaworthy for a road trip.
No, it's very much like him thinking, oh, this will make, like, great video footage.
It's
and
fun
pictures.
Content, the idea of it, but I can't fathom falling in love in that car on that trip, going through that part of having driven through that part of the country, because they're driving to what, Oklahoma? From
Charleston, and they talk about how Charleston is like crazy hot out and everything. And so I'm just like, although I think it's leading up to the holidays, or I think the holidays happen at some point during the book, or else I'm just mixing this up with a book I read after this one. But this is one of those books where, again, it has nothing to do with the steam level. For me, it's very much just about, I think the concept alone was where it started wrong for me. And so from there, it's hard to appreciate a lot about the book when, like, you're already being set up with this dynamic that you're not okay with. And it's hard. It's kind of like when it's not the same thing, but it's like if you read a book and one of the main characters does something like, cheats on one of the characters or...
Well, with Game of Thrones, there's a lot of stuff that is not consensual and is therefore very hard to root for characters later.
And you find this in a lot of dark romance. Like
that's
a recurring thing. Yeah, for sure. And some people seek that out, and that is 100% up to them. Totally, fine if that's what you want to read. But that's where it stopped for me. It was the setup just lost me. And then I have to say, I did enjoy the road trip, but the ending to me was a tremendous letdown, because I will say, for somebody who complains about the third act breakup moment as often as I do, and you have experience with screenwriting, so you know what that is in terms of...
The dark night of the soul.
Yes, but it is a very similar structure for romance novels. There's not always, but there is constantly this misunderstanding, this moment that breaks up the characters as we enter the third act. And for this one, and I feel like with most mistaken identities or books where one of the characters is lying about their identity, going in, you're like, oh, well, the misunderstanding breakup moment is going to be when the other character finds out. It's always going to be, how do they find out? How upset are they that this person has been lying to them all this time? And this is the most anticlimactic version of that ever to exist, because not only does she not tell him, nor does he find out like on accident by stumbling across her messages or something like that, but she gets on a plane and leaves before they can reach their destination on the road trip, which is to go see her online alter ego at her parents' house in Oklahoma. She leaves. She gets on a plane, hightails it back to Charleston. He goes to the house, meets her mother, and her mom is just like, come up into my daughter's childhood bedroom and it'll all make
for a second,
sense.
I was like, I had this moment where I was like, they're acting like Anna died. Because when he gets there, the mom's like, oh yeah, no, come upstairs, there's something I want you to see. And he is like looking around.
Is Anna here?
He sees her graduation photo, he sees the random eye beanies, and I was like, this feels like a Make-A-Wish kid died. This literally
is like
feels
a memorial.
Yeah, it's spooky and it's weird. And like, even as a person who, my parents no longer live in my childhood home, but well before they left it, my childhood bedroom was not my childhood bedroom. And many adults, like I had like briefly moved home, like between breakups or whatever, and for me, my childhood bedroom had changed and evolved. For my husband, he left home, didn't look back. His childhood bedroom didn't look like his childhood bedroom. It got redone because, he wasn't living there. So I was like, to have this perfectly preserved childhood room.
I don't have as much of a problem with that, because I do know plenty of people who still have that at their parents' house.
It hit me as spooky that like
it's spooky combined with her not being there, and the mom and nobody giving him any sort of indication. Like, they're speaking very vaguely, like, she's not here
feels
anymore.
Like she died.
Yeah.
And if you still have a big Lilo and Stitch stuffy on your childhood bed,
I definitely do.
So it was so funny. We went home to my husband's dad's house, and his dad had pulled his old Stitch stuffy out of like storage and thrown it on the guest bed. And I was like, oh my word.
I love it. I definitely still have stuffed animals like at my parents' house, like up on a shelf somewhere.
Yeah, and I mean, I have boxes full of American Girl dolls in my parents' garage. Like, don't get me wrong, but and if that is your childhood bedroom situation, congrats on your parents staying together. Congrats on congrats on all that.
They love you.
Yeah, they love you.
Maybe a little too much.
The thing is, like, the childhood bedroom is one thing. It's the making the mom, like, have milk and cookies and lead him up there and opening this door to this hermetically sealed bedroom.
And Rosie's not there. She's not there.
So creepy. I can't get past it.
It's so weird. It's so anticlimactic. It's so not confronting the consequences of your actions. It's like, I just watched one of the newer Netflix romances that they've put together. what was it called? It takes place in Australia. Victoria Justice was in it randomly enough, but I was like, oh, good to see you again. And it was really cute, but there was definitely like this third act moment of she finds out who he really is. And of course she's upset about it because he's been lying to her. And I was like, I could have told you from 20 minutes into the movie that this moment was coming where she says, why did you lie? Why don't you trust me? Blah, da, dee, blah.
Right.
And that's exactly what I was expecting. And then not only does she not have to have that moment with him in this book, he's not upset about it. That was the other part to me that was, on the one hand, I was like, oh, this is interesting that I think this is one of the first romances I've read where not only do they not have like a confrontation about this, but he's perfectly fine with it.
And that's where I said he's a Mary Sue. Because the Mary Sue figure, when there's a male hero, never makes him feel bad about his deceit or his whatever. You know, she might get a little upset, but fundamentally she is an infinitely forgiving, one-dimensional figure.
There are definitely, I think it's okay to have something in between. Like, personally, I like reading romances where when it's leading up to that moment that you think, oh God, here we go. Here comes the dumbass breakup that could have been avoided by a conversation. When we get to that point, sometimes there are books where they have the conversation where they're like, look, I'm upset with you, but I'm not breaking up with you. Like, I
there's
love
emotional
you.
There's an emotional maturity vibe
Yes, but that's not
but we
what
didn't get
this
that either.
was. So it was a letdown. It was anticlimactic. And then, you know, there's a cute finale gesture. Like, you know, grand gestures I've said on the show are not my jam. However, when they are tailored to each couple to be a little more personal, I can vibe with it on some level. So the fact that he cuts together some clips of their road trip together and he does it himself and puts it together to show her, I was like, okay, this is cute. Like, it's not for me, but I can at least buy into this. And he's telling her that this is for us. This isn't necessarily to show my viewers. This is something that's just for you and me and everybody else that's there. But I'm okay with that.
But it once again made her, to me, he's still a figment of her imagination, but now he's tangible. Like, he doesn't become more of a real person throughout the story.
No.
And that was the thing is like, you know, he's so focused on his image or whatever, but he is exactly who he says he is somehow. And I think seeing him maybe suffer something or go through something challenging and maybe not be quite so charming about it, not to the point of becoming a villain, but like,
but being
facing
human.
something hard, facing a frustration. Like, even when he goes through his breakup, he's like, it's for the best. And it's like, you know,
like, honestly, it would have made more sense to me if he was also the one suffering from anxiety, that there were repercussions of his life being this persona on screen. And there is some allusion to it that he does have some emotional things that he's working through because of what he's basically the situation he's put himself in. And that's understandable. Again, it makes sense coming with the job that he's taken upon himself. But you're right. I think him to go from being who he was at the start to the end, there's not a lot of change. And then he falls in love with her very quickly. It's like a switch 75% of the way into the book, and it's
and she's still his employee, and also she's there in a work capacity. She's not there as his friend accompanying him. She's literally his producer.
He didn't pick her either. Somebody else was like, you should take her along, and obviously trying to construct a way for them to like get to know each other, fall in love some more. And it's so manufactured start to finish. With the way the characters act and the way that they're orchestrating like puppets this relationship, that it was so false to me, and I could not believe that he was okay with it, that he was okay with not only her lying to him, but every single one of his closest friends and family members also being a part of the lie. That's never an issue. It's never brought up as a problem.
And he does have like issues with his sister that are kind of I think maybe a holdover from the first book.
That's what I was guessing too.
Because they're not really fleshed out here, but there is clearly depth to them that the reader of the second book is expected to know.
Yeah.
I felt like he almost gave me the creeps in the sense that he never loses it.
Mm-hmm.
And
He's always
I feel
on.
like we see Anna Rosie being off at times. And that's okay. That's normal. That's human.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying I need him to like put a hole in the wall. I'm just saying like
No.
I to see him express
some kind of emotion
other than, you know, acting like he's an admissions representative for a university. Because that was like his vibe was like, I'm a happy guy in a t-shirt. How you doing? Let's just be charming. Let's just be fun. And it's like when you're 16 and you meet that guy, you're like, oh my gosh, he's just like guys on TV. And then you meet that guy at like 29 and you're like, what is wrong with him? There is a degree of like, yeah, like meeting the guy who's charismatic and nice is fine. But often as an adult, it's hiding like narcissism or something that like you don't want to dip your toe into, really. Like I don't want to see him behave in a way that makes me hate him. I just want to see him be real, and then you can respect him more seeing him be real
and then grow from whatever that experience is. And the other thing I do want to point out is that it's clear to me that her character was much more fleshed out than his character. And the thing that drives me nuts about this is that it's a dual POV. Like it is told from each of their points of view. We do get to hear from both of them, but he's not adding to it. It's not adding up for his character. We're not using those moments to explore the things he's thinking about or worried about, in his inner narration. We're not getting more of that, because a lot of the times when characters say things to each other, they obviously mean different things. They're thinking about other things. We don't get a lot of that from Isaac.
It felt like Rosie, at times, the book felt like Rosie stepping outside herself to write their love story. Like, it felt like, it felt the way that Isaac was written was like completely consistent with how Rosie saw him.
Okay.
And so it felt whitewashed in a way of like, he will never go against what she thinks he is.
Like still her idealized version of
there
who
were
he
so
is.
many opportunities for him to have even just a quirk or an interest or something that she wasn't already aware of.
Yeah.
Or didn't know, and we never learn anything new from Isaac. And so, you know, he is who he says he is. He is completely transparent.
And she already knows everything about him because she's a diehard fan. She knows all these details about him.
And then, like, the things she learns about him are things that don't contradict what she already thought. Like, he's great with kids.
Yeah.
Oh, good. He's great with kids. Did you think he was going to be bad with kids? Did that surprise you? No. It just, you're taken aback by how good he is. Because when you date men... As an adult woman who has dated many men, I feel like there's always something to provide friction at the start of the relationship of like, oh, he doesn't think this is all that funny, or he doesn't like this thing, or he went through this really hard thing and that affects him still. And the hard thing that he went through was this breakup, but it doesn't affect him still. And the thing he doesn't like or doesn't find funny is like, it's like he likes something she doesn't like. It was like licorice or whatever.
Yeah, it was that bad candy.
Yeah. And I was like, this is not what actually unpacking your bags and learning about someone feels like.
Like,
as an adult.
Oh no, he has a great relationship with everyone. He has a fine breakup with his girlfriend. Their biggest issue is that they have differing tastes in snacks. Like, I'm like, this is not...
Yeah,
this is not real.
And that's why I think you mentioned it being a great YA novel. I think because when you're 15, those are the conflicts you go through. When you're 25, 28, 30, it's like, oh, and by the way, I was engaged and it jacked me up. And it's like, well, okay.
And honestly, because he's a YouTuber, this genuinely could have been written for younger characters. Like there is the makings of a setup meant for younger characters. He is the YouTuber. She could be the intern at the company. You know, I mean,
or, you know, he's a YouTuber and they're both college age and like she's an intern because she's still in school. He skipped school. He didn't go to school. He became famous young. Yeah. And that is like a whole thing for him. Because he did, I think, become famous like in high school or just out of high school. And that's when she became a fan. She was a teenager. I just think like having some of the meat that like real relationships have, and having this be written by a woman who's in her, I think, 30s or 40s, man, you know that by the time people are this age, they've gone through more serious stuff than this.
Yeah, it's a naivety. Like it's just this idea of like, and this is why I think a lot of people shy away from no steam or low steam romance, unfortunately, is obviously there are people who want like the dirty sex in their books, and it's like, that's totally fine. I get it. I'm with you. But at the same time, I think there are some people who don't read these books because they assume, oh my God, there's just something so odd about like these grown adults having such a chaste relationship. And
it's like the you know, faith-based film.
Yeah, exactly. And to be fair, you know, obviously
it's for somebody.
Yeah, and there are people in real life who do share specific you know, values, and
but a great many people coming from that world. I went to a university that partnered considerably. I went to a Christian university in the South that partnered with produced a lot of faith-based films and partnered with faith-based filmmakers. And one thing that was always discussed, even in this circle of people that agreed with that type of filmmaking, agreed with those values, agreed with doing all that, everyone was like, we don't want it to feel like a faith-based film, though.
Okay.
Because they're regarded as shallow and bad. And it's just interesting because it's like, even in those circles where you are dealing with like true believers, like people who are absolutely on board with things being 100% chaste, 100% whatever, you are still in this race and this rush to make it feel more real, because there is an acknowledgement that things are not as real as they could be.
I think there's a similar vibe when it comes to like the content that like Hallmark and similar channels are producing for their movies.
Absolutely.
And that's also a critique that people have had of those channels, knowing that like the people who run them and who are making a lot of decisions are, you know, specifically practicing a faith that maybe doesn't condone certain language and sexual activities on screen in any way. And so I do understand that, but it bums me out to read a book like this that, again, I think in a different context could have been great, that I think could have been a lot more enjoyable. And you know what? If you loved this book, good on you. Like, I am not here to yuck your yum. It's a cast of sweet characters who, you know, I love how much they love each other. But again, it's like, I need more reality in the content that I'm reading. And I know maybe that's weird to some people who want this escape into romance. And I think that there is an escape in that everything works out favorably for the characters that, you know, are falling in love. We know that that's not the case in real life all the time. But for this one, it just felt too cookie cutter to me. It just felt too like you said, he has no faults or flaws, and she obviously has a lot more going on than he does. But even then, everybody is okay participating in this lie. And when the lie becomes the guiding force of the entire story, I don't believe it. And if it is the guiding light of the story, I know that there should be some consequence of making that such, and there wasn't. So even then, maybe if there had been even like a big blow up at the end, and they, you know, eventually got together, I think I would have been okay with that a lot more than I was. Because even, at least in that case, there would have been some kind of result of these choices that she and all these people had made to participate in this lie, but then we didn't have it.
Well, and to my point too, like what I'd said, just to clarify what I meant when I was talking about the faith-based film thing, the issue in those circles is not that the product isn't, that it's too chaste or that it's too virtuous, right? I understand wanting to make things with that drive. I get it. Like, if that is your belief system, phenomenal. Make things with that motivation. The problem of quote unquote like faith-based films, or particularly squeaky clean, steam-free books, is that people mistake chastity for shallowness. And I don't think there's any reason this book couldn't have had emotional depth without having the things that the author perceived as unnecessary.
Yeah.
You know, because I didn't feel like there was any moment in this book where the story would have been enhanced by people having sex or by people doing any of that stuff. It didn't need it.
I don't think it would have made sense in the context of
No, it would have been strange.
This relationship.
And that's where I'm saying, like, I just want to be very clear. I'm not knocking how clean the story was. I am just disappointed that the author didn't provide emotional depth that aligned with the character's age and station.
Yeah.
And I think she could have done that. We're not here calling for this to be a bodice ripper. I think she could have done it. She could have done it in her genre, in her world, in her way.
Yeah.
And had, maybe it wasn't a relationship. Maybe it was a broken engagement and he's really hurt and he's really crushed. And so him rebounding with Anna is way tougher because it's a little too soon and he's not sure. And then it's like, you lied to me when I was vulnerable? Really? Like, that's really what you did? And having friends who are a little more voice of reason could have helped because, she has these close friends who are like, don't quit your job, don't be rash, but also do keep lying to him. That's
enabling.
That part's
cool. Enabling.
It's
all
emotional
of her choices.
enabling, and a person who is, as a person with, I'm a person with severe social anxiety that was, obviously not helped by a pandemic. So like, I feel for her, but I think there's a degree to which when you're a highly anxious, highly sensitive person, sometimes you can end up going down these rabbit trails of like, this idea is great. Yeah. And it can help to have someone who's like, give that one some air.
Yeah.
Because I think you're acting on anxiety or you're acting on stress, pressure, physical, whatever. Like you're not doing the thing that's going to be best for you. And as someone who cares about you and respects your autonomy and respects your mental health,
I want to help you reel it in.
I just want to help. And my best friends are that way. My husband is that way. My family, they all serve not because I'm at all incompetent or incapable, but because being a creative person, being an emotional person, being a sensitive person who also has this disorder where my feelings feel like facts, which is one of the things that anxiety does, having a voice of reason is helpful. It's the role my therapist plays. It's the role my friends sometimes play. It's the role my husband often plays. And I don't think there's any shame in being like, hey man, this ain't it. Back to the drawing board.
Yeah, I think people have this twisted idea that like if your friends or family or whoever's closest to you don't agree with you and support you in every single, idea that you have, every decision you make, every item you say, then they're not doing their job as like your friends. And I've actually seen this recently in, feuds on Bookstagram and Book Talk between people sticking up for their friends when the majority of people are quick to point out the flaw in someone's argument, that they still defend them. I will defend them no matter what. Being a friend means sticking with your friends no matter what. No, honestly, my friends and my family are the ones that I trust to tell me when I'm doing something wrong or tell me to at least consider something could be done in a better way than when I do it. So I agree. I think with the friend characters, there could have been at least one naysayer, at least one person.
You don't have to infantilize the person and be like, oh, she crazy and she's going way too far.
Oh, no.
Not at all. I just think, one naysayer, one person who's like, hey, don't you want to build this on something real?
No, they were all on board with the lie from the get-go. So anyway, but normally this would be the time where we would share sexcerpts, but there are none. So this is, full steam ahead. Let's go ahead then and dive into our ratings. And obviously, normally we would be rating for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10. 10 being the very best that it can possibly be for you, of course. And I'm just going to go ahead and say that the heat is not applicable in this book, given that it is not only closed door, but just 100% steam free, like not even an allusion to there being any kind of sexual activity.
Yeah.
Let's start with heart. What do we think out of 10?
I am going to say a 7. And the reason I'm going so high is because I think this book is unfailingly earnest. I believed that Jenny Proctor meant what she was writing and that she wanted us to root for this couple. She wanted us to root for Anna or Rosanna, whatever her name was. I guess I believed it in the sense that I believe she believed it.
The intention.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think the intentions were unbelievably pure, even though the execution was lacking for all the reasons we've mentioned.
I do understand, though, what you're saying, and I'm torn on this one, honestly, because there's no heat.
No.
Sometimes you read a romance and you're like, did they fall in love? I don't know, but at the same time, they sure boned hard. And so there's like this give and take. Same with humor. Some books are obviously meant to be much angstier than others, and some are downright hilarious. This is one of those books where I think the heart would definitely be the highest rating of the three, at least on this podcast. But I have such a hard time buying into a romance that is built off of a lie. Like, it's something that I think is just really problematic, at least for me personally, that definitely affected my overall read of the book. So I think for me, I wouldn't be able to go higher than a 5 as far as the heart rating goes. That being said, the found family aspect is great. The fact that everyone is so supportive of each other, I think is wonderful. This is honestly a great work environment. They're all best friends and family and coworkers.
It's funny because I'm very close to a situation right now where a startup is starting up and friends and family are being, utilized to kind of get things going before there's proper funding. And I'm like, I get it in that environment, being like, hey, my brother knows finance, or my cousin can code, or whatever. But I feel like taking them all with you and then making them your executive board is a different thing.
It's not for me. How about humor? What did you think?
I love humor.
Yeah.
I'm a comedy girl. I'm going to give it a 3.
That was the number I had in my mind. Like, because I feel like there were definitely moments where it was meant to be funny. Like,
I feel like someone was staring at me going, laugh. That's a joke.
Yeah, and but for me, I'm a fan of situational comedy. So for me, the best comedy, again, it was, all my favorite moments were that road trip. Like when they took that road trip and, oh, we tried these snacks and they're gross, and oh, I can't believe you like this. Ha 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 ha. I liked all the situational stuff as opposed to what felt a little more, again, manufactured, I guess is the word of the day as far as this book goes for me. But
synthesized.
Yeah. So, and Heat, gotta give it a 0, not applicable. It's not even, part of the story. They share a couple of kisses. And again, I'm not opposed to reading. I feel like I read a lot of no steam romance, especially during the holidays, because for some reason, people can't fuck at Christmas, I guess.
Well, it's because you're always at home and the Lilo and Stitch stuffy is on the bed. So it really kills the mood.
Yeah.
It's the let's do it on my twin bed thing from SNL, but 4 beanies that you created when you were 18 are on the 4-poster bed, so you can't.
Yeah.
He can never have sex with her in that room. Yeah, I love a Hallmark movie. I love, I love cheesy Hallmark series. I like to watch them while I'm baking. Like, I loved Good Witch. In this instance, there was even less heat than there is in some of those stories.
Oh, for sure.
There wasn't even chemistry where you're like, no, kiss, 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 kiss. Like, there wasn't even that.
No. And I think it's because so much of the story comes before they actually start spending time together. Like, that again, I think if some things have maybe been moved up, that if there was a lot more time spent on this road trip where they're literally in close proximity to each other and have to get to know each other, that would have been great. I think we've proposed 3 or 4 different ways where you could keep the integrity of this story while making some changes that might make it a little bit better.
Just make him a ghost. Make him a ghost, and then they can have... I'm just thinking of the Mediator series.
Yeah, and there's option number 5.
Ghost for Christmas on Hallmark. I'm like, make him a ghost. No one bangs. Yeah. Everyone's mom gets a nice story.
Yeah, there you go. That's option number 5. But it's... Again, you know what I will say, I did enjoy the supporting cast so much so that I did look to see who the other books are about. And part of me is considering reading another one of the books in the series, because this was, like I said, my first Jenny Proctor book, and I have a hard time necessarily gauging an author's writing style based off of one book.
I can't imagine this is her best work.
And that's my thought too, is I'm wondering, maybe this is just the one book in this series that, because of the way it's set up, didn't work for me. Maybe I'll love the next book. I don't know. And so I kind of do want to maybe check out one of the other books in the series, especially I think the next book after this one is about the camera guy. And I liked him.
I loved him.
I liked him a lot. And so I'd kind of love to know what works out for him. So even after hearing us bitch and moan about this book for going on an hour and a half, we're still interested potentially in reading more.
I loved every scene with him. And I briefly was like, what if Rosie falls in love with him?
That would have been a twist.
I was like, that's a great twist, because it's like, you mentioned Cyrano de Bergerac, and I was like, it's not Cyrano though, because it's all her.
Yeah.
I do love a romance novel where it's like, it was you the whole time. You know, it was, it's the guy you don't expect. And I, I married the goofy best friend. Like I'm a sucker for that guy in a book. So I don't know.
Does that mean that whether it's Jenny Proctor or somebody else that you're interested in potentially reading more romance after this?
Of course. It will always be something I annoy my husband with.
I love it. I love it.
The day I die. My grandma would read Danielle Steele when I was growing up.
Classic.
She would sit there with like her big old readers on and just be like, one day when you're old enough, we will talk about this because some stuff is happening in this book and the only other person home is a 5-year-old. Yep.
There you go. There you go. There will always be Danielle Steele and so many more.
Yes.
Well, I'm glad that you did this. I'm glad that you joined me. And I wish I could say it was maybe I don't want to say a better read, but just better for us, like a more pleasurable.
Is pleasurable the word?
Yeah, absolutely. In all ways to interpret pleasurable.
I don't know why that has me blushing.
I mean, because we've spent, an hour and a half discussing a Steam-free book, and the hottest moment is the word pleasurable.
Billy Grant's YouTube romance right here.
No, this has been lovely. Thank you so much for hanging out with me and reading this book, and we'll have to check in and see what's next up, whether it's more Jenny Proctor or something else.
For sure. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.